Oklahoma and Baylor. The last 2 times these teams have met, we were gifted legendary battles. Just beyond the Brazos River, the Sooners put together one of, if not the most impressive comeback victory in program history. Down 28-3, the Sooners fought back. And by the final whistle, 34-31, and a victory for Oklahoma. Then just 3 weeks later, a rematch for the Big 12 championship. An overtime thriller settled by a short touchdown rush from who else but Ramondre Stevenson. But this year the story will be written with some new characters. This year, a new face patrols the Baylor sidelines. And a new quarterback is calling the shots for Oklahoma. Are we in for another heart-stopping, gut-wrenching, awe-inspiring storybook finish? Or will the Sooners write a new chapter in this conference rivalry? From Owen Field in Norman, Oklahoma, it's the Baylor Bears and the white-hot Oklahoma Sooners. And this is Gameday U.
Season winds to a close. The Oklahoma Sooners find themselves in a familiar position. With just 2 games to play in this abbreviated conference slate, the Sooners once again control their own destiny. 2 wins, and they will head to Jerry's World, AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas, on December 19th to play for a 6th consecutive Big 12 championship. But first things first, they've got to take care of business against Baylor and West Virginia. Parker Thune alongside Shannon Earhart and Caroline Grace here this morning on Gameday U, breaking it all down in advance of the Sooners' 7 p.m. kick this evening against the Baylor Bears right here at Owen Field. Senior night, last game here in Norman this season, we assume. Can't take anything for granted these days in the era of COVID-19. But of course, folks, last we saw this team on the field, they throttled Oklahoma State 41-13. In a lopsided Bedlam matchup that I think many expected was going to be a tightly contested battle. Lo and behold, the Sooners left no doubt that they are the best team within state lines.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That was an awesome game to watch. I really thought it was going to be more of a close game than not. I did predict Shane Illingworth coming in, Spencer Sanders getting hurt, allegedly, but that was a fun game to watch. I'm happy we came out with a win for Bedlam.
Yeah, Oklahoma definitely needed to prove that they were the better team, and I really think they solidified that.
Spencer Rattler, efficient, paramount efficiency on, or rather 2 Saturdays ago against the Pokes. 5 touchdowns, a career high, 4 of them through the air, 1 rushing. He only threw the ball 24 times, so making the most of the opportunities that he was given.
Yeah, our run game really showed out too. Like that pass run efficiency was awesome that you just talked about. So yeah, I think Rattler did a great job. I think he was super excited to come out for his first Bedlam and really show out and prove what he's worth, especially in a big game like this, against like allegedly, Oklahoma State being the Big 12 top of the line defense. So I think he really showed out.
That's what I was going to say. Supposedly they were supposed to be the best defense in the Big 12. Did that show up? Not necessarily, but it doesn't matter because Oklahoma proved they were the better team.
Yeah, they really took hold, too. I think OU's defense was definitely better than OK State.
Now, Oklahoma State was able to bottle up the Sooners' offense in the early going, at least in the run game. Ramondre Stevenson's first 10 carries only went for a total of 16 yards. But when all was said and done, the senior out of Las Vegas had accumulated a career-high 141 on the ground on a career-high 26 carries. So I think it's pretty clear that Stevenson has become the lead guy in this Oklahoma backfield, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think also a lot of the things I saw with Oklahoma State where they tried to focus on those new guys coming into play and kind of lost sight of those people that were playmakers before those guys stepped in. And I think that's really what hurt Oklahoma State, but I definitely agree that he is our top guy in the backfield as of now, and I hope he continues to improve this season. He's got a lot of room for work. Maybe we can hopefully hold on to him for a little while longer.
I think he also just had so much pent-up energy from being out basically the entire season that he really just took off, especially for Bedlam.
Now Stevenson, as I mentioned, 141 yards on the ground. TJ Pledger, Stevenson's backup, or the guy that was expected to lead the committee this year in a lot of people's minds, 7 carries for 18 yards. Seth McGowan didn't record a touch. So Stevenson is clearly the guy that Lincoln Riley trusts the most out of the backfield, and he's going to be the bread and butter of this offense over the closing stretch, I think it's safe to say. The Sooners' offense appears to be at its best when that balance on offense is slightly tilted toward the run. As you mentioned, 29 total touches for Stevenson. Rattler only threw the ball 24 times. It resulted in 41 points for the Sooners, 21 of which came in the first 7 minutes of play.
Yeah, I think they really took charge and took hold. And you mentioned Pledger and McGowan both didn't have a lot of touches, but I think they were huge compliments in the beginning of the season, and they did really well. Stevenson is really just ramping up and getting back his starting spot, and the spot that he really deserves, that he's showed us all.
Yeah, something that people really need to take notice of in the Big 12 is as soon as you can make your opponent feel uncomfortable, you've got it in the bag. And I think Oklahoma knew they needed to jump the gun and get out there in order to make Oklahoma State, kind of feel threatened, feel rattled. And they did that successfully, and we saw that. We saw the game take off in the first quarter.
And the Sooners were riding a significant wave of momentum on the heels of that Bedlam victory, but lo and behold, the next week, they had their first COVID-19 postponement of the season. They were supposed to take on West Virginia a week ago up in Morgantown. Found out on Wednesday of that week that the game was going to be pushed back due to COVID-19 concerns within the Oklahoma program. They paused team activities for 5 days last week over Thanksgiving, resumed practice this past Monday in advance of the Baylor game. But here's what we know, Shannon and Caroline. The Sooners will be shorthanded going into this matchup with Baylor. Of course, the game against West Virginia rescheduled up in Morgantown for December 12th, a week from today. But as far as this Baylor game is concerned today, they're going to be without their top pass rusher in Nick Benito, who leads the team in sacks, and they're going to be without starting nickelback Brendan Radley-Hiles. At the bare minimum, there may be some additional absences, but the Sooners are down at least 2 defensive starters.
Okay. I'm just going to call it like it is. Are we really that upset that one of those guys is going to be out? I think this is a perfect opportunity for Alex Grinch to get put in his place when it comes to his defensive backs.
I think it's also we need to be careful as well because we don't know what coaches and what other players have also got COVID. But I think without Bonito, it's really we're gonna see a shift of play since he's been a leader this entire season.
You mentioned Alex Grinch. There's no guarantee that Alex Grinch is going to be on the sidelines this evening.
And
we don't know anything for sure. But what we do know, folks, is that a Sooner legend was back on the sidelines for practice this week, helping guide the Sooners into preparation for Baylor. Bob Stoops, he of 18 seasons at the helm of the Oklahoma Sooners, and of course that 2000 national championship run, is back in Norman. Of course, he remained on the Oklahoma staff even after stepping down as head coach. He's on the institutional staff as a special advisor to the athletic director. And Joe Castiglione essentially said when Stoops took on that role, he's going to be doing some special things. And in this scenario, the special thing that Bob Stoops is doing is potentially coordinating this defense tonight against Baylor. If Alex Grinch is unable to be on the sidelines, odds are Stoops will call the shots. Here's what Lincoln Riley had to say earlier in the week about Stoops' return to coaching.
That was great. Yeah, it's nice. I mean, it's been kind of in our hip pocket this whole time. As if we had any staff member that fell off, I mean, we got a Hall of Famer sitting on the bench. So that's a pretty good bench when you can call that guy up. And more than that, just how much he cares about this program. And I don't think there's anything that he wouldn't do. So it was great to have him out there today. It was awesome. Our kids were excited to see him. All of us were excited to see him. So I think he had some fun as well.
So there you go. Bob Stoops last coached for Oklahoma in January 2017 when Oklahoma defeated Auburn 31-19
What can I say?
in the Sugar Bowl.
I was in Oklahoma for that game, actually.
Were you?
Yeah, I actually got in a fight with my cousins. 15-year-old me was really aggressive, but
You
were
should
you
have known
rooting
you were going to
for?
be a
I'm
Sooner
curious.
I
fan.
know.
If you were in
I can
Oklahoma.
still remember being like, "We're gonna win!" Like, I hate Oklahoma.
Who's
Look
we
at
in
me
this
now.
scenario?
Auburn.
Is we Auburn?
We is Auburn, but I mean, I'm really eating my words now.
For those of you that
Fine.
couldn't tell and that don't know Caroline on a personal level, she does hail from the great state of Alabama. Well, I don't
If
know if I
you've
would call it
watched
great.
this show
the
more
state
than
of Alabama.
once, you picked up on that. I'm
You probably picked up on it just from listening to her talk.
Well, you know, one team that could use a coach step in is Auburn, but
Oh, you're not sold on Gus Malzahn?
or Chad Morris, sadly. But
All right, we're getting
with
off the
that,
rails
with
here.
Too much Auburns.
Let's
too much,
explain.
Too much
Let's
orange.
break this down a little bit. How is Bob Stoops able to just step into that position? How is there not an NCAA violation? You know, now he has a son on the team.
Well,
It's not clicking.
let me answer that for you. It's because he remained on the team's institutional staff. Lincoln Riley said were he not still on the university's payroll, he wouldn't be able to be on the sidelines coaching.
Gotcha.
But since he is on the university's payroll, it was a possibility that they had considered. Riley said it was something they had in their back pocket in case they ever needed to use it. And lo and behold, Oklahoma could be down close to half of their sideline coaching staff against Baylor tonight. So
They're lucky. They're lucky that he was able to step in and step up because I think without Bob Stoops, this team would.
Well,
Stepping
that's,
in,
I
it
mean,
just-
that's the next question: is how successful can he be before we start questioning Alex Grinch?
I don't think he's going to be there for that long. I think that COVID protocols are going to clear up and everybody's going to be healthy soon, that we won't see him being in a lead role too much.
Well, and consider this. We don't know for a fact that Grinch isn't going to coach. He's been quarantining this week. He didn't have his regular Wednesday media availability. But there is the chance, especially given the new CDC guidelines, that Oklahoma is able to get Grinch cleared to coach tonight and everything goes back to normal. But I think the overwhelming odds suggest right now that Grinch is going to miss the game. And you look at who the Sooners would potentially have available to call the shots on the defensive side of the football, Stoops is pretty much the obvious candidate. There's a lot of inexperience on that Sooner staff, at least among the defensive positional coaches. And we have to keep in mind, Stoops was considered one of the brightest defensive minds in the game
Right.
not
Yeah.
long ago. And it wasn't just in his tenure at Oklahoma. He had phenomenal stints as co-defensive coordinator at Kansas State and then won a national championship as defensive coordinator at Florida.
Right.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see
Yeah.
with those key names out, especially Bookie not making an appearance.
And Bonita, we're going to need other guys like Asamoah to really step up and step into that
Woody
position.
Washington,
Yeah.
I expect him to show up and show out. So
Marcus Stripling, also a guy that
Yeah.
has been making plays in limited snaps over the last few weeks. So I would be surprised if he isn't one of the guys that gets first crack at replacing Benito at that rush linebacker position.
Agreed,
We
for
don't
sure.
know John Michael Terry's status. Of course, he missed the last game. He missed Bedlam in the COVID-19 protocol. So assuming he's back, he figures to factor into that situation as well.
to me, I feel like we have Ronnie Perkins back. That's a big deal. If we can keep him healthy, keep him on the field, it's good enough for me.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Now, the cancellation, in terms of this team's mentality heading into the Baylor game, because we mentioned they're off a huge wave of momentum in that convincing Bedlam win. Are you concerned about a letdown at all heading into this Baylor game, just given the fact that they were expecting to go up to Morgantown and play a football game last Saturday and obviously didn't get to do that?
No, I think that the results of that cancellation are going to come later in the season, aka the Big 12 championship. I don't think it's going to come tomorrow. I don't think Baylor is equipped enough on the coaching side of the ball in order to come to Norman and beat a decent Oklahoma team, I should say. But I think what we're going to see is they're not going to have a bye week going into the Big 12 championship, and that's going to hurt mentally and physically. I think some ways it could be positive because we are in a pandemic, so no one can go home, no one can travel. You have 7 days till you're on the road again, and that's going to help a lot. But just the fact that there is no break between now, next week, and the Big 12 championship.
Well, I'm going to counter you there because I don't think it's going to, pardon me, I don't think it's going to affect OU at all. Treating this week, having off against West Virginia, it's like an accidental bye. And basically they're able to prepare for a better team like Baylor to play this week. So I really just think that it's not going to affect OU really at all, especially since Iowa State beat Texas. Texas is out of the picture for the Big 12. Now all OU has to do is win out and just show their weapons, and they're going to win.
Well, the overwhelming odds right now would suggest that Oklahoma will be facing off with Iowa State in the Big 12 title game, and we'll discuss that and plenty more coming up next here on Game Day U when we take our spin around the Big 12. Does Baylor have what it takes to give Oklahoma a run tonight? And again, we'll examine those Big 12 championship scenarios. Stay with us. Welcome back to Game Day U live from the Palace on the Prairie, or rather, the shadow of the Palace on the Prairie, I suppose, as we get you ready for Oklahoma versus Baylor this evening at 7 p.m. Parker Thune, Shannon Earhart, Caroline Grace here with you for about the next 2 hours. We've got you all covered, not just with regard to the action happening here in Norman, but all across the college football landscape. Now, Shannon, Caroline, let's take our typical spin around the Big 12, and let's start with the team that Oklahoma will face off with this evening, the Baylor Bears. Now, as you will recall, our very first show of the year, I predicted that Baylor would go 3-7.
Yes,
I took a lot of flack for that, particularly from Shannon.
Yes, you did.
Lo and behold, Baylor is well positioned to win 3 games this year. So that take aged well. Regardless, I think a lot of people would assert that Baylor is a better team than that 2-5 record indicates, however, especially given what they were able to do last year when the only team that they lost to over the course of the Big 12 season was Oklahoma. And then Matt Rule leaves for the NFL to coach the Carolina Panthers. They bring in Dave Aranda, former defensive coordinator at LSU, to fill his role. And there has been, as expected, a bit of a letdown. Mm-hmm. They did lose a lot of NFL caliber talent, particularly on the defensive side of the football. But I'm curious what you guys think. Is this a Baylor team that's better than that 2-5 record suggests?
I'm definitely going with yes, and that's just because I don't think that Baylor is necessarily bad, because the Big 12 is just not good as a whole. But 2-5 is brutal. I think that Dave Aranda, like you said, has really made some headway with what he's working with. But to me, it just looks like they're getting out-coached in every single game. I think that there are a lot of tools in Baylor's toolbox, and you see that whenever they're going into the first and the second and the third quarter, and they're only down by 3 or up by 3 in that matter. And I think for the most part, they're a first quarter team, they're a second quarter team, and they're a third quarter team. They're a decent football team. They are just not a fourth quarter team. I mean, the biggest loss they've had so far is by 10, and that was to what, TCU maybe? Anyway, it doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, every game they've been out-coached. I do not think that this is an issue with their players. I think it's an issue with their coaching staff, which is to be expected when this is a first-year head coach coming into a very good Baylor team that lost everyone to the NFL. I don't really think I can expect anything more from them. However, the consequences have been brutal. They're making the Big 12 look worse, and they did throw a wrench in a lot of people's plans, such as Texas and other teams, but teams like TCU, bad TCU team, there's no excuse as to why they lost to them. And you can clearly see in games like that, they just got out-coached.
Yeah, I completely feel that for sure, but I also think that it's just a lack of consistency. You say that they don't show out in the fourth quarter of the game. They don't show out for all 60 minutes, and they're just not executing. Their record explains exactly where they are. Beating Kansas and Kansas State, not a flex. Kansas is awful, and Kansas State lost their star QB, Skylar Thompson. The turnovers from both sides of the ball are awful. They're lucky they seriously even won 2 games at all. And there's so many games where they've blown the lead. We talk about that Tech game where they were up 20-6 at one point. Texas, they had an early lead, and then they gave up that lead later in the game. And then Iowa State. Iowa State's a good football team, I get that, but they were up 22-7. I don't know what it is, but every time that they have the lead, they either blow it, they snag the lead early and they either blow it, or they just get completely blown off and never get the lead at all. So their record explains exactly where they're at. They should be that 2-5 team. And if they go 3-7, give you a round of applause, Parker.
I appreciate it. Now, we got to keep in mind here, Baylor did lose a very talented running back, John Lovett, who chose to opt out of the 2020 season. This is a team that has some potential. Charlie Brewer while not elite, is certainly a solid quarterback. R.J. Sneed has an NFL ceiling at the wide receiver position. And I firmly believe that Aranda's the right guy to lead this program going forward. He was the sexy hire in a lot of ways in last year's coaching cycle. He was the guy that was kind of the ideal suitor to succeed Matt Rule at Baylor, and the guy that a lot of schools wanted. And of course, given the situation at Baylor and how much success they were able to have last year, really out of the blue, I think it made a lot of sense that they landed him. And I think it kind of suggests that they're trying to reverse the narrative as it pertains to Big 12 defense, right? Because Oklahoma with Alex Grinch right now, and Oklahoma State to a certain extent, really the only two teams that are playing consistent defense on a weekly basis. But I think that's what Baylor is trying to build with Dave Aranda at the helm. And in a year or two, I think Aranda's going to have a beast on his hands. Baylor's going to be a football team that's in contention for a Big 12 title and maybe a college football playoff berth. We forget they were one win away from a college football playoff berth last year, so they're not that far removed from a tremendous degree of success. I think it just comes down to the fact that the expectation had to be that 2020 was going to be a bit of a down year for this program, given the amount of turnover that they had.
It's also that Charlie Brewer, though, you mentioned him. He's just not meeting expectations at all, and maybe that's because of Aranda, and he's not used to that type of play. But Matt Rule also left this team on a complete high, where you said they were a contender for the college football playoff. Here, now they're not doing well this year, and I get that, and yeah, it's a rebuilding year. I think patience is a big part of that as well.
That's exactly what I wanted to go off of. Charlie Brewer is a decent quarterback, but he has not produced to the caliber I think he's capable of all season, and I think that directly lies within the coaching staff. I mean, look, we're not talking about an LSU team. That LSU team is just garbage this year because they lost everyone. I don't think that Baylor lost too many players on their roster to not keep it up. So I think it lies directly within the coaching staff, but like you said, I see that. I don't think they should make any changes. It's just going to be a rebuilding year.
It's patience. It's definitely patience and just waiting for it.
All right, let's step into the realm of the hypothetical for the moment, Shannon and Caroline. Iowa State has locked up a berth in the Big 12 championship game. The Cyclones will play on December 19th at AT&T Stadium. Assuming Oklahoma wins their final two games, the Sooners will be on the other sideline that afternoon in Arlington. Assuming for the moment that Iowa State and Oklahoma are the two teams that face off for the Big 12 championship 2 weeks from today, who wins?
I love this. I think Iowa State has been the up-and-coming team for so long. I love to see their success, but let's face it. Oklahoma's, no one's fooled into believing that they're going to lose the next two games. If they do, that's a different story. But Iowa State is a good football team. And I used to be on the side of you cannot beat a team twice until we saw it last year against Baylor. So I fully believe that Iowa State will beat Oklahoma again. And here's why. It's just one key factor that Oklahoma does not have, and that's big plays and turnovers. Oklahoma is a consistent team. They can go up and down the field. The Cyclones can make those big plays, those 3-and-outs, those turnovers on offense and defense. And I think that that's what's going to produce their win. Brock Purdy has done a phenomenal job at the quarterback position, and Matt Campbell has done great on headset. He's really starting to make a name for himself. I'm excited to see. I don't think this is just going to stop this year either. I think that it's going to be a long stretch of the Cyclones' success. I think that starts with them winning the Big 12 championship against Oklahoma. The biggest thing in the Big 12 is to have those secure wins. Be the better football team. Nothing says better football team than beating one of the most prominent teams in the Big 12 twice.
Well, you talk about those turnovers and you say that OU hasn't had as many turnovers as ISU, but I'm pretty sure you're wrong on that. And I think that OU on the back half has had much better production than ISU has. So countering you, I think that OU is definitely going to win and win out. And you talked about making that second win in a game during the season is hard, but the second time I think OU will definitely put it away. I said they're much better now than they were. They're more comfortable with the run, especially now that Stevenson is back. They have a lot more production with him. We said he's the top of the line guy. The defense, I predict, will dominate Purdy. I think we're going to see more rushing and much better decision making by the D line. I think they're going to have more patience. I think Trey Norwood and Ronnie Perkins and Nick Bonito, if he's back, I think we'll be able to be more patient with the ball and really dominate this ISU team. Let me remind you that Oklahoma and ISU both played Oklahoma State and ISU lost. Yeah, it wasn't a true testament game, but when it comes down to it, OU was the bigger man, and they came to play, and they really showed out. They both had a close game with Texas. They have really close contenders, but you see time after time that OU really is the stronger team and that they put forth more of a strong effort. They both put forth an effort, but OU just comes hungry and ready to play, where ISU, I feel like, is lagging a little bit on the second half of their season.
I'm definitely with you, Shannon, because as I look at this matchup, and I look at what the Sooners have done over their past 5 contests, this team is on a torrid tear. If you're compiling a list of, say, the 5 teams in college football that nobody wants to face right now, sure, you start with Alabama, Clemson, Florida. Oklahoma might be 4th or 5th on that list.
That is just, don't
You got
fool
Notre Dame in
yourself,
there. You got
Parker.
Notre Dame in there.
Oklahoma is not a scary team to anyone but Oklahoma State and Texas. That's just the truth.
I don't think you're right at all there. I think Oklahoma is definitely a scary team. They're on a 5-game win streak here, and they're playing pretty good teams, top contenders. So I think that OU is pretty scary. I'd be scared of them.
Consider the fact that College Football Playoff Committee selection chair Gary Barta, when the first college football playoff rankings were announced, elaborated on the committee's ranking of Oklahoma at number 11, which was a lot higher than I think many people imagined. And he said, look, Oklahoma is playing at a level right now that I think a lot of people expected them to play at early in the season, and we're very cognizant of that. He also took note of the fact that Oklahoma played the first 5 games of the season without Ronnie Perkins and Ramondre Stevenson, 2 guys that have made a tremendous impact since returning to the field. So this Oklahoma team, I'm comfortable asserting, can go toe-to-toe with just about anybody in the nation right now, I think, save for Alabama, Clemson, and Florida. Those, to me, are the 3 teams that are tip-top in college football. But is there any other team right now that you think Oklahoma wouldn't give a run for their money?
Georgia.
Who else would soundly beat Oklahoma?
I think they would
Georgia
beat Georgia.
with Stetson Bennett at quarterback?
Yeah, he's not
This
it.
is the argument. I've made it last week. I'll make it every single week. You take the most mediocre team. They're 5-5, whatever, with a winning schedule or a winning record. Not saying they're undefeated, not saying they've won 8 games. 6 5-game win team in the SEC or the ACC is better than Oklahoma. And what I want to go back to with the Iowa State game, they've already played. I don't think they're not dumb. They're not just going to forget the fact that Ramondre Stevenson and Ronnie Perkins aren't coming back. But here's the difference. They put pressure on Spencer Rattler early. You don't think they can do that again? That's something that we cannot control. Spencer Rattler is not equipped that when he gets uncomfortable, he breaks down.
Maybe in the beginning of the season he broke down, but
Against
now he's
worse
so
teams. Against worse teams. You don't think he's going to be nervous going into Iowa State, a team he's already broke down against?
Yeah, but now he's got it in his mind, and now he's probably practiced getting around that and getting out of the pocket quicker. And if they do put tighter coverage on Stevenson, then some other guy is going to be open. They'll be able to pass it to Marvin Mims or Seth McGowan or somebody else.
Here's what I'll say. I don't think anybody would dispute that this Oklahoma team is not the same team that lost to Iowa State on October 3rd in Ames 37-30.
Right,
this
but
team
I
is
also
playing on a
don't.
much higher
I
level.
don't think Iowa State is the same team that only beat Oklahoma by a touchdown.
That's a fair argument. All right, let's get into a little bit of draft analysis here. As you look at the Big 12, give me one player that you think has the highest professional potential.
Okay, going in a little deep here, over my head. I know this, but hear me out. I think that Sam Ellinger has the
not hearing you out.
I don't
potential. Hear me out. I think that the better quarterbacks in the NFL are always the underrated, kind of average, use their weapons really well quarterbacks in college. You look at Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers.
You cannot compare
Tom
Patrick
Brady.
Mahomes to Sam Ellinger.
I'm just
Please.
saying, I think that Sam Ellinger is the most efficient quarterback in the Big 12. I've stated this before. Now you give him pro running backs, pro wide receivers, not the trash that Tom Herman has recruited the past couple of years. And think about what he can do. He's got the size, he's got the build, he's got the mentality. I don't think that Sam Ellinger is a bad football player, and I think you put him in a team that already has all of those dynamic weapons around him, but he could take Carson Wentz's spot.
Ooh.
I think by Caroline's logic, Charlie
That's
Brewer
Jalen
should be the
Hurts.
#1 overall pick in the 2021 NFL Draft. And by the way, for what it's worth, Texas has had a top 10 recruiting class each of the last 3 years. But Shannon, what do you think?
Tylan Wallace, hands down, I don't know what you're talking about, but this guy is insane. I talk about him before, but his precision is always on point, and he never fails to get open in the middle of the field. He's so reliable, and yes, I know he's not flashy, but he always gets the job done. I think it would be great to see him on the Bengals and have Joe Burrow passing to him. I think that would be an incredible duo. And also, I'm not sure he'll go in the first round, but I know that he'll definitely get a spot. And the way that he finds ways to separate himself from defenders and his downfield blocking is just phenomenal. You see him gain that downfield yardage after the catch, which is great. So his speed overall causes headaches. Tylan Wallace is a guy that I would not want to be crossed up with, and I don't think any other DB would want to be crossed up with either. So Tylan Wallace, OS2, hate to say it, but it's better than Sam Ellinger.
If Tylan Wallace
I would
isn't
have chosen Tylan Wallace.
If Tylan Wallace isn't a first-round NFL draft selection, I don't know what scouting in the NFL has come to.
Sometimes-
Offensively, I think you're exactly right with Tylan Wallace. Defensively, I think it's Ronnie Perkins. I think that's got to be the
Good
popular take because this guy is far and away the most talented defensive player in the Big 12, and again, there would be few that would dispute that notion. Perkins is a game wrecker, and we've seen that in just 3 contests since he's been back from that suspension. He's a redshirt sophomore. There's a decent chance he makes the jump to the professional level this year, enters the 2021 NFL draft. I would hope, and I think Sooner Nation would hope, that they have Perkins back in 2021, but it's no guarantee, especially with what he's been able to do in such a limited amount of time on the field, and what a difference he's made to Oklahoma's effort on the defensive side of the football and their ability to pressure the quarterback. It's been night and day.
Yeah, you know, I think it'd be a good idea, though, and it'd be smart for the NFL and college coaches to keep him in Oklahoma for 2021.
For sure.
I think he definitely needs that experience. Redshirt sophomore, so what? He's a junior. He still needs time to really get comfortable with who he's playing with. And since he's playing with Spencer Rattler, an elite quarterback, once he gets to the NFL, and it's just going to be easier for him because definitely the offense is going to produce better than Oklahoma.
And
So
he barely got to play this year.
I
Why
know,
would
he
you
got
wanna-
no-
why
yeah, he
would
got
you
no
wanna
chance at
leave
all,
When you
but-
could make a big name for yourself at Oklahoma.
And the defenses are way stronger in the NFL too.
But
so.
yes, I just want to point out, I would have chosen Tylan Wallace, but Shannon took him first, so I do agree with you on that.
Snagged him.
Well, we'll be back in just a moment here on Game Day. You will see you at the top of the hour, but coming up next, Ashley Vandeveld and the studio team take a look around the nation. Stay with us here on Game Day U.
For the final time this season, we welcome you into the Gaylord Hall studios for another installment of Game Day U. I'm Ashley Vandevelde, and I'm joined here in the studio by Jesse Cleaner and Matt Bowling. How are you all feeling this morning?
I'm feeling great. It's game day. I'm excited, and I'm ready to talk some football.
about
It's
you?
championship December. Let's get after it.
Sounds great to me. All right, before we discuss our heroes and zeros, Dylan Rivera has the top 5 plays.
Thanks, Ashley. We start up I-35 in Stillwater, Oklahoma. The Pokes and the Red Raiders. QB Spencer Sanders looks right to star wideout Tylan Wallace, and he'll bring it in for 6. This catch would end up being Wallace's last at Boone Pickens Stadium, and what a way to go out. Oklahoma State left with the win in a 50-44 shootout. Next up is Clemson and Pitt. Trevor Lawrence drops back to pass and rips a long ball out to Cornell Powell, who reels it in with the left hand. A.J. Woods was hawking the redshirt senior, but Powell says, "You're too little, kid." Lawrence throws it at the sun, and Powell does the dirty work to make it a top 5 play. Now for some Big Ten football. Nebraska at Iowa. When in doubt, find your 6'8" tight end. Adrian Martinez is flushed out of the pocket and tosses one out to Austin Allen, who makes the sideline grab, but was he in? Referee says yes, he was. Allen stretches out, and like a dancer on Broadway, he just gets his toes down. The Cornhuskers would fall in a close one, 26-20. Louisville and Boston College. Wide receiver C.J. Lewis is supposed to run a fade route to the back corner of the end zone, but gets tripped up along the way, but it doesn't matter. Touchdown, Eagles. Lewis can't seem to stay out of our top 5 plays, as this is now his second time he's made the cut for an impressive touchdown catch. Falling down, one hand, 6 points, top 5 play. And last but certainly not least, for the first time in Power 5 collegiate football, a woman stepped out onto the field to play with the boys. Sarah Fuller suited up for the Vanderbilt Commodores on Saturday and kicked a squib kick downfield to start the second half. Fuller's day job normally has her between the posts as goalkeeper for Vandy. She got the opportunity to kick for the Doors when they traveled to the zoo to play the Missouri Tigers. If you read the fine print on the back of her helmet, it reads, "Play like a girl." We certainly tip our caps to Sarah and Vanderbilt for this groundbreaking moment in football.
Thanks, Dylan. It's week 13 of college football, but let's rewind to last week. Whose performance in week 12 stood out to you? Jesse?
My hero this week is Jarrett Patterson. He is the junior running back for Buffalo. This past week, he had 409 rushing yards with 8 touchdowns. He is quick, agile, and talented in making up for lost time since they didn't start playing until November. He is tied for the FBS record for rushing touchdowns in a game and had the second highest single game rushing total for touchdowns. They pulled a 70-41 victory over Kent State on Saturday, and Patterson tied former Illinois star for Howard Griffith's FBS record of 8 rushing touchdowns set against Southern Illinois in 1990. Through only 4 games, Patterson is just 80 yards shy of his straight 1,000-yard season, and he's become the first Buffalo freshman with more than 1,000 rushing yards in 2018 and set a school record with 1,799 yards last season. I am confident that today he will reach another 1,000-yard season when they play later this evening.
Yeah, what a great
incredible
performance. What a great performance by Jarrett Patterson. I mean, he was all over the field. Well, unlike Jarrett Patterson, my hero is a guy who only saw the field briefly, but he still came up big. Let's head out west for some Pac-12 after dark. Oregon State looking to upset rival Oregon. Beavers trying to take the lead with 40 seconds left on 3rd and goal. They don't get it. And to make matters worse, quarterback Tristan Gebbia is injured on the play, so they have to turn to JUCO transfer Chance Nolan with the game on the line, and he punches it in. First snap of his D1 career, and he brings Oregon State their first win over the Ducks since 2016. That is what I call nerves of steel.
Incredible.
Well, I have the same idea as Matt, and I took a running back from Oregon State in the same game last week where they defeated number 15 Oregon. My pick is running back Jamar Jefferson. He was instrumental in this win over Oregon. His performance included 229 yards, 29 carries, and 2 touchdowns. It's crazy that he had that many carries and racked up that many yards, and it was a huge win for Oregon State to beat a ranked team. Their record is now 2-2, but Jamar Jefferson was very important in this win over Oregon. They couldn't have done it without him, making those plays, getting those yards. So that was my pick for hero. All right, let's take it. Now let's take a look at who disappointed the fans with their performance. Who's your zero from this past week, Jesse?
I have to go with TJ Finley from the LSU Tigers. I honestly am starting to feel bad for this guy. He is the freshman quarterback backup for Miles Brennan, who is out for the season or might be out for the rest of the season with an abdominal injury. The loss to A&M on last Saturday, 20-7, with no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and 1 pick six. I'm sorry, but that is not looking good. He has had 5 interceptions this season with only 4 touchdowns, and Coach O is not happy. He has a complete passing percentage averaging at about 36%, and he's starting again tonight against Alabama. But on Thursday, Coach O said the freshman quarterback Max Johnson will also play, hopefully giving TJ a break. He has just not been doing good this season, and honestly, disappointing.
It's hard to follow up Joe Burrow, but 36% passing, percentage.
It's just not good.
That's so rough.
Yeah, yikes. Well, I just showed you a quarterback who came up clutch. Now I'm going to show you one who did not. Let's go to Syracuse and NC State. NC State. Syracuse hosting NC State, 20 seconds left. Orange need a touchdown to tie. Rex Culpepper takes a sack on third down with no timeouts. You cannot do that. But what you really can't do is this. Get ready for it. Watch. He spikes the ball on fourth down. That is a disturbing lack of awareness from a redshirt senior. I guess that's why Syracuse is 1-9.
I just don't know what was going through his mind to do that. Like, what is the thought process behind that? It makes you wonder.
Yeah. I mean, first, you do the one thing you can't do on third down with no timeouts. You take the sack,
Yeah.
and then you spike it on fourth down. I'm speechless.
Who knows? Hopefully he lives and learns. But I am going to take it to Northwestern, the Big Ten, and my zero for this past week is Northwestern's offense. They had that loss to Michigan State, an unranked team, and Northwestern was ranked number 8. And their loss was in large part due to their offense, specifically their quarterback. Quarterback Peyton Ramsey had 2 interceptions this game, which isn't a crazy amount, but he was continuously sacked. They could not get any type of movement going on this offense to kind of get down the field, score like they needed to against this Michigan State team. And they were really not able to gain any momentum on the run game either. Their leading rusher only went for 41 yards, you guys. That's unacceptable. More needs to be done if they wanted to win this game. And Northwestern was kind of being rumored for like playoff contention, not really, but like a bigger team to compete with Ohio State, and then they go and lose to Michigan State. What do you guys think of that?
I just think that 2020 has been a crazy year, and there have been just so many letdowns, like teams, offensive line, defensive line, players, and it's just like, honestly, bad performance doesn't surprise me anymore. It just like shocks me. I feel like there's been so many disappointments that I'm just not even affected anymore. I'm just like, well, that's disappointing.
Who do you guys think is the next competitor against Ohio State in the Big Ten? Like, who's going to be in that Big Ten championship?
I just don't know. What about you, Matt? Do you have an idea?
I mean, I think the next best team to Ohio State in the Big Ten is Wisconsin.
Yeah,
it would have to be Wisconsin, but I mean, we all saw how it ended up there. Last year, Ohio State came out on top. I think we're looking at the same result this year, if, of course, Ohio State is able to qualify for the Big Ten title game, if they have enough games.
Right.
Yes, we're going to get into that a little bit later, but right now they're just looking like they're going to hit that 6 mark. But we are going to take a break, sorry, my bad. The Big Ten, we talked about, do you think Ohio State and Wisconsin will end up in this Big Ten matchup? But Northwestern already beat Wisconsin head-to-head. So what do you guys think of that?
I think it's probably likely that those 2 schools are going to end up. I mean, like you said, there's not a lot of games. There hasn't been a lot of time for a lot of these Big Ten teams to, make their stand, say, I'm the best team. I'm going to make it to the championship. There hasn't been that moment yet, and I don't think we're going to get that moment. So that's why I think it's probably going to end up being those 2 schools, because we're running out of time, and it's all coming down.
Yeah, Northwestern, I feel like, yes, they already got the head-to-head win over Wisconsin, but I also feel like they're kind of likely to drop another game the way they've been playing. I do think Wisconsin will get that Big Ten title game berth. And again, if Ohio State is able to get in, I think it's going to be the same thing we saw last year.
I agree. I don't think Ohio State will let themselves not get in. I think they're going to make sure they can play these 6 games. They've got 2 left, 1 today. So I think that this is like a must for them, because I think they want to be in that championship game. I think they want to go to the playoff. And to do that, they're going to have to keep, chugging along.
Well, and they really have the motivation. They're trying to keep up. They're trying to live up to the performance they had last year. Unlike schools like LSU, who had a great season, and now they're at the bottom. Ohio State is not going to let that happen to them. There's definitely that motivation in the players that in, one of the worst seasons and one of the worst years for a lot of teams, that, they're not going to let it happen. They're going to keep it up, because I don't think anyone can afford for any more embarrassment.
Justin Fields is pound for pound the best quarterback in college football.
I agree with that. I think he's a great quarterback.
And he is a man on a mission this year.
I agree.
After the way it ended up last year against Clemson in the semifinal, I think he's out here. He wants revenge. He wants to get back to that. He wants to deliver the Buckeyes a national championship. And you can tell by the way he's playing this year, he's got that chip on his shoulder. He's going to get them into the Big Ten title game, and he's going to get them back into the playoff.
Yeah, there is a lot of aggression. And honestly, I feel like there's a lot of motivation for a lot of players for all different schools. Everyone's angry, and they have a lot of, like you said, chip on their shoulders. And I think that's what's keeping those great players on top, and I think that's what we're going to be seeing more throughout the rest of the season.
Well, great conversation there, guys, but we are going to take a break, but when we come back, we will be back with our 4th and 4 segment.
And the kick down at the 35-yard line, and Sarah Fuller.
This past weekend, Sarah Fuller became the first female kicker to play in a Power 5 matchup. Sarah's impact on the game caught national attention. But girls playing football isn't a new concept. Just down the road is senior Emma Price, kicker for the Blanchard Lions.
I told them that I was simply a good kicker as well. And so the next practice after that, I went and I showed them that I could actually kick too, and I got on the team. I love when little girls' parents come up and they're like, my daughter loves watching you play. So that's one of my favorite parts of it. I really enjoy being that inspiration for the younger girls.
And tonight, under the Friday night lights, Emma is kicking for the Lions in a semifinal playoff game. As usual, she has the support of her teammates as well as her town rallying behind her.
We play like we normally do. We should win. My goal is to focus enough and make all of my kicks that I'm supposed to make, because it could be the deciding factor between a win or a loss.
And just across the Red River is Marty Mccoy, junior kicker for the Munster Hornets. Early in the season, Marty saw a need at kicker and knew she was capable of beating out the boys for a spot on the team.
I can fill this role. I can be that for the team, and I know I can do that, but I need others to know that I can do that too.
Marty is a fearless competitor and loves the game of football. Her teammates and coaches are behind her, but some in the community didn't approve of a girl being on the roster.
That was the first time I really experienced any hate comments or anything like that, but I had so much support on top of that. So I think a bunch of kids from my school ended up going into that comment section and just standing up for me.
Marty looks past all of the negativity, and instead, down the road she has paved for younger girls aspiring to be just like her.
Younger girls in my community that come up to me, the little 3rd and 4th graders that chant my name or whatever, I just hope I'm making that impact to show them that nobody can tell you what you can and can't do, and that if you believe in yourself, then you can run with it and you can do whatever your heart desires.
Last week, Marty showed just how valuable she is to the team when the game came down to one final moment. Girls like Emma, Marty, and Sarah Fuller hope to inspire young women to live out their dream. Be who you want to be. Play what you want to play. And when others try to bring you down, step out on the field and play like a girl. Sydney Bowyer, Gameday U.
Thanks, Sydney. Welcome back to the Gaylord Hall Studios. It's the 4th segment, and that means 4th and 4. As always, we are going to answer the four of the biggest questions in college football, but let's start with something a little different. The biggest news from the football world last week was Sarah Fuller suiting up for Vanderbilt. I want to hear your thoughts on her impact on the sport and what it does for women in sports. Jesse?
I'm actually going to hand this off to Matt first. I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that was a great package from Sydney. I love that she
Great
introduced
package.
us to these high school girls. My high school, Providence Day in Charlotte, actually, we had a girl named Sydney McCorkle kicking for us this season. And she is the first girl in the history of the North Carolina Private School League to play football. The thing about it, though, is that Providence Day really had to fight for her to be able to join the team because the league had a rule that girls couldn't play football. And I think, I just think while it's great to see those barriers being broken, both with Sarah Fuller and at the high school level, that knowing that they had that rule in my home state's league, and also some of the comments that they were talking about in that package with the girls getting, that's a reminder to me that we still have a lot more work to do to make the football community an inclusive place for women.
I agree. One of my biggest things about this is I really find it to be so inspiring, and that's what these girls talk about. They talk about being an inspiration for younger girls. And football, it's a guy's sport. I'm not arguing that, but that doesn't mean there's not a spot for women on the team. If she's the best player, put her in. If she's the best kicker, why don't you want your team to have the best players possible? And sometimes that is a girl. I think that Sarah Fuller was a great role model for this big historic moment, and on her helmet it says, "Play like a girl." I think that is amazing, turning a once derogatory phrase into something that is empowering to younger girls who want to play football or grow up watching football and they're like, wow, I wish I could do that, but I'm a girl. They're breaking barriers, and those thoughts I don't want to be in the younger generations anymore. The world is changing, and I think that these women are a great representation of this movement. And Sarah Fuller in an interview said she wants to be a permanent member of the Vanderbilt team, and I think that that is an amazing aspiration for her.
I think that, like you guys already said, this is a great opportunity for women in sports. She's the first woman to play in a Power 5 football game, and it shows that it's possible. It breaks a barrier that if there are women who want to participate in the sport, they can. Someone has done it now in the Power 5 league. So that's my thoughts on it. It's a great opportunity. She was the first to do it, so we'll see what comes next. Now let's hone in on one of the top teams in college football this season, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Can the Irish get lucky and win a national championship this year?
I think they definitely can. I mean, they're the Fighting Irish. They're Irish. They're lucky. Why not? Fans have been saying for years that, you know what, this is Notre Dame's year. This is their year to get the national championship. And I mean, hey, it's 2020. Anything can happen. They are currently undefeated and #1 in the ACC. They are #2 in the AP Top 25 poll, just behind Alabama. And I think that they're in a really good position to go for the national championship. I mean, they made the BCS championship in 2012 and the college football playoff in 2018, but they were also undefeated in those seasons as well. But they didn't have to play a conference championship, but now they have that opportunity. With the pandemic, I mean, a lot of things have changed, and so having the opportunity to play in the ACC championship, that's a big deal, and they're making history. They've beat Clemson once now, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna play him again, and so why couldn't they beat him again? Yes, they have Trevor Lawrence back. Yes, it's a new challenge, but I don't think that's stopping Notre Dame from playing their best. However, if they do win the ACC and Alabama loses the SEC to Florida or an A&M, they have an easy chance. But I mean, if they do play Alabama, that's where things start to look a little uneasy. But until then, I am hopeful and I am confident in the Fighting Irish.
It's just that, in order to win a national championship in college football, you have to be elite in just about every facet of the game. Not very good, not even great, elite, especially offensively. And that's where my biggest concern is with Notre Dame, and that's why I don't think they have what it takes to win a title. The passing game in particular is a big concern for me when I look at Notre Dame. The Irish are averaging about 229 yards per game through the air. You look at teams like Ohio State and Alabama. Buckeyes are averaging 303 yards per game through the air. Alabama, 380. And that's really because those teams have weapons that Notre Dame just doesn't. Bama's got Devontae Smith. Ohio State has Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. Notre Dame's top receiver is Javon McKinley. I mean, Javon McKinley's a fine receiver, but he's no Calvin Ridley. He's no T. Higgins. He's no Justin Jefferson. You look at the national championship teams from the past few years, they've all had these stud guys as their top receivers. I just don't think Javon McKinley is that guy.
Well, Jesse, you almost convinced me, really, because, right, a lot of this is riding on Clemson. If they beat them already, why couldn't they beat them again, except with Trevor Lawrence? But I'm going to have to say no. I don't think Notre Dame can win a national championship. And, Matt, you talked about the defense, or the offense, excuse me. I'm going to talk about their defense now. They are not athletic enough on defense. If you watch their highlights, the Notre Dame defense just lets players run by them. They don't make the tackles. You can't let that happen. Teams like a Clemson or Alabama, they're just going to run up points on you. And Ian Book, I don't think as a quarterback he's dynamic enough. Like you said, these teams need to be elite if you're going to win a championship, and I just don't think Notre Dame has all the facets that they need on the defense and the offense. There aren't enough playmakers, and other teams are more likely, I think, when they face off against them to win a playoff, like Alabama or Clemson or Ohio State. So I think that those teams are just going to be better. And I think if they would have played Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, I think that Clemson probably would have won, but we'll have to see in a championship because they will probably face off against one another. So, what do you guys think of that?
I mean, well, we were both kind of mentioning the athleticism, and the whole aspect. If you want to win a national championship, you got to have dudes. Okay, you got to have guys that can just you got to have guys that can just straight up go in there and outmuscle your opponents.
Right.
I look at Notre Dame and I don't see a lot of those type of guys on the roster. I see plenty of that at Alabama. I see plenty of that at Ohio State.
I think they have it in them. They just haven't shown it yet. I believe that they have the aggressiveness they need. They have the spirit they need. They just need to do it. They need to bring the pressure. They need to up their defense, and they need to become more aggressive. They've been playing well, but they need to play better. But I think they still have the potential to do it. I'm not saying that they're at their highest moment right now, but I believe they can be elite. I really do.
They better get there soon.
We'll have to see. There have been a handful of teams that haven't lived up to expectations this year. Jesse, who's been the biggest disappointment in college football this season?
As I mentioned earlier, TJ Finley has not been doing well, and neither has LSU. Coming off one of the best seasons in history last year, this year has been a complete disappointment in comparison. I mean, they made history last year, but the majority of their star players have moved on to the NFL, and it's caused the program to take a step back, and they need to rebuild. I mean, the season most likely wouldn't be going as poorly as it is if they hadn't lost their original starting quarterback, Miles Brennan, in the beginning of the season and forced to rely on their freshmen. The Tigers have been getting demolished. I mean, they lost 48-11 to Auburn and 20-7 to A&M, like I mentioned earlier. They are unranked and they are third to last in the SEC, going 3 for 4. The defense is weak. TJ Finley is not doing a good job. He's going to keep throwing interceptions if they don't change anything. I mean, their offense isn't that great, but they have to rely on their defense if they want to save the season. I mean, they're not going to win any championships. They're not going to win the SEC. It's obvious, but they need to work on that defense and they need to rebuild the program. Just because you lose all of your star players doesn't mean you're a bad program. You got to keep building up and living up to these expectations you set. But I mean, they reached their historic peak last year, and I think that's why we've seen such a detrimental drop in their performance this year.
Yeah, I know. I think everyone knew it was going to be tough with losing as many guys as they did, but still, I didn't anticipate them looking this bad. Well, it turns out there was a fraud in Pennsylvania this fall. Penn State started the season ranked number 8 in the preseason AP poll. They proceeded to become the first team to start 0-5 after being in the preseason AP top 10. With the exception of the game against Michigan last week, they have been outplayed and outcoached by everyone they've faced. I mean, it's not like you said with LSU. It's not like they've hit a rough patch with roster turnover and the talent's not there. James Franklin has brought in a top 15 recruiting class in each of the past 4 years. They just look lifeless. They have almost nothing in the tank. Sean Clifford is extinct, and it all comes back to coaching. There is no excuse for these kind of results. I think James Franklin needs to seriously consider asking Vanderbilt for his old job back before he ends up as one of Nick Saban's offensive analysts.
I don't know if I'd go that far. It's 1 year, but we'll see. Maybe they'll have a late season comeback with these couple wins. But so my biggest disappointment is also in the Big Ten with Michigan. Michigan is 2-4 this season, and I think a lot of fans were hoping this would be their breakout year, maybe make it to the playoff. But this is Jim Harbaugh's 6th year, and when they're looking this bad, his job is on the line up in Ann Arbor. People expected a lot more from him, from his Michigan team, and he only has 1 year left on his contract, so the finances of it, not too big of an issue. And they lost to a winless Penn State last weekend, so that is a really rough loss for them. They couldn't even come over that bump. But Michigan has had good years in the past. They've went to a couple New Year's Six bowls, but people are expecting more from this Michigan team, and LSU too, and Penn State. So what do you guys think?
Well, I know I mentioned earlier in the season, I think it was the first show, that Michigan's really going to be hurting this year, which they have been. I mean, they've had a great program in the past, but there have been a lot of different challenges that they've had to face this year, and they just honestly haven't been able to overcome them. I think that that's a challenge a lot of schools are facing. Obviously, everyone's facing challenges these days, but I think that shows the true power of a program is whether they're able to overcome these difficulties or not.
I mean, in order to be a disappointment, you kind of have to have high expectations.
Right.
I think most people know at this point that Jim Harbaugh is just Tom Herman with a Super Bowl loss. The man is not a good coach. Michigan has pretty much reached, I mean, they've hit their ceiling with him. I don't think, you kind of know by now that they're not going to live up to their preseason expectations.
Exactly. It's all about.
So all three of your answers on that one were Power 5 schools, so let's take it outside the big name conferences. In the college football playoff era, so over the last 6+ seasons, who's been the best non-Power 5 team in football?
So we're talking about the past 6 seasons, but I think it's this season's 2020 BYU team. Historically, in the college football playoff era, BYU hasn't been a prominent team other than their chance for the playoffs in 2016, but this year has turned that around. They are undefeated and they are number 8 in the AP Top 25 poll. Their star quarterback, junior Zach Wilson, has 26 touchdowns in just 5 games with 2,724 yards. And with a change of plans this week, now that they're playing Coastal Carolina today, who is also undefeated, it's going to be their most difficult game of the season, and yet the odds are in BYU's favor. They are doing phenomenal. And also in this week's college football playoff rankings, BYU is at the number 13 spot, and if they win out, there is a small chance that they can squeeze in and possibly make the playoffs. I think that this year's team has done phenomenal compared to their past seasons, and especially when you're looking at non-Power 5 teams. I mean, you got to admit, BYU, it's up there.
I'm going to stay in 2020, but I'm going to go with the team that's ranked above BYU. Cincinnati is having a fantastic year, and a large part of that is due to the play of quarterback Desmond Ridder. An excellent dual threat, 16 passing touchdowns, 11 rushing touchdowns. This guy's averaging 8.5 yards per pass attempt and 7.9 yards per carry. That is a guy who can get it done any which way. The defense is allowing just 15 points per game. They're tied for second in the country with 13 interceptions. And they're also getting it done against better competition. Cincinnati has a better strength of schedule and strength of record than BYU this year.
Well, I can't argue that both of those teams are doing phenomenal this year, but Over the course of the whole college football playoff era, I'm going with UCF. Most specifically, their 2017 season, where they went to the Peach Bowl and beat Auburn. This UCF team was undefeated on the season in 2017, and they won their conference championship before, like I said, they went to the Peach Bowl, and no one has repeated success like them. The next year in 2018, they went to the Fiesta Bowl. That's 2 New Year's Six Bowls in a row for a non-Power 5 team. No other non-Power 5 teams have been able to do that in the college football playoff era, and Mackenzie Milton was a key part of their team. And, he has passed them by. He actually just entered the transfer portal. But to me, this is the best team that has been in the college football playoff era for a non-Power 5 team, and they're definitely a force to be reckoned with. So.
Yeah, but just like with BYU this year, that year's UCF team had a lower strength of schedule, lower strength of record than this year's Cincinnati team. So when you look at undefeated group of fives, you have to consider who they're playing against. Who are they beating to get that undefeated record?
Well, if you're comparing 2017 UCF to 2020 BYU, are you saying that we have a chance to go to the playoffs too?
I mean, I don't know if I'm saying that. I'm just saying who has the better strength of schedule, who has a more impressive resume.
Exactly.
I think since this year's Cincinnati team beats out both of y'all's teams.
Okay, well, I'm just
saying.
I don't know. Okay, I'm just saying, with the mix of plans this week, now that they're playing Coastal Carolina, that's gonna. That's a better strength of scale. It's going to be a really, really good game. I agree.
I'm picking BYU. I think they have a great team this year.
Oh, of course. And so it's an interesting dynamic this year. I mean, the strength of schedule argument, you can't control the schedule. We've seen postponements. We've seen cancellations. I wouldn't hold that against the team this year. I just think that 2020 is not the year to make that argument.
I think you can still make strength of schedule argument, but maybe not as fully with when you have to consider cancellations and such. So it's time for us to take a timeout, but when we return, the remote team will discuss whether one of OU's assistant coaches will make a good head coach in this coming season. Stay with us.
Kicking off hour 2 here on Gameday U. Parker Thune here alongside Shannon Earhart and Caroline Grace. Let's talk coaches across the Big 12, ladies. And let's start right here in Norman with a guy that comes from a prestigious coaching lineage, is one of Lincoln Riley's top assistants, and is widely considered to be a budding head coach, one of the guys that before long figures to be at the helm of a program somewhere. That man is Shane Beamer, who interviewed last week for the head coaching position at South Carolina, as we've been told. Now, Lincoln Riley has reconciled with the fact that he's not going to have Shane Beamer forever. He's said as much. He's saying, we need to be prepared to lose this guy because he's going to be a head coach before long. Now, what I want to know is, with the current state of the South Carolina football organization having just fired Will Muschamp, former Texas assistant Will Muschamp, for what that's worth, is Shane Beamer a good fit for the South Carolina job? What do you think, Caroline?
Well, I just want to know, does this mean our whole H-back, tight end groupie has to stop if Shane Beamer leaves? Because
they're going to find somebody to step in. And he's built his ranking there.
But I think he is absolutely a perfect fit for South Carolina. I think if he's given the opportunity, he could recruit great classes into there, but you're going to have to give him some time because Will Muschamp has caused some problems. I don't think necessarily on all sides of the ball, but I do think that Shane Beamer can come in there easily and fix things. I would even go as far as to say that he could produce a Heisman winner. I think that Shane Beamer has the offensive mindset of Lincoln Riley as far as air raid and that goes, because I think that the way he builds his tight ends and H-backs is exactly the creativity he needs to stir up those SEC defenses. So if you can be dynamic on that side of the ball, you can tear down teams like Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, all of those teams that seem to be producing defenses every year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think he'd be a great fit at South Carolina, a sinking South Carolina team. I think he'd really just bring a sense of certainty to the team, especially since he's from South Carolina originally, Charleston, I believe. Mm-hmm. But he's coached he's coached SEC teams. He's coached 7 different schools, and then 5 of them are all in Big 5 conferences, Power 5 conferences. So I think that he'd just be a really good fit, especially since he coached under Lincoln Riley and he coached under Kirby Smart of Georgia. So he's smart with that, and he knows how to win and knows how to produce. Really, all I can say is that I think he'd be a great fit. South Carolina really needs somebody, and I think that Beamer would be a good fit for.
If I sit here and say no, will he stay?
I would.
I think it was only a matter of time before any big team picked him up. And, you know, it wasn't too long ago that South Carolina was one of those top teams in the SEC, but with Shane Beamer, I definitely see them getting back.
Beamer was also, I don't know if you knew, but he was also the recruiting coordinator when he was on Georgia I think it was Georgia. He was a recruiting coordinator from 2007 to 2008, I believe. So he does have recruiting practice, and you were talking about Heisman winners, maybe Heisman contenders, that maybe he'll be able to recruit somebody at that higher caliber that will be able to really show out for that South Carolina team.
Beamer's father, of course, Frank Beamer, the legendary Virginia Tech coach who was there for many, many years. So Beamer comes from a line of very successful coaches. Well, at least one very successful coach. And so with that in mind, kind of where I stand with it is I don't know if this is the right fit for Beamer just because of where that program's at. Like, the way I look at it, I think he could do a lot better. Just looking at the jobs that will be open across the country. Look at Texas is probably going to have a vacancy. Not that Shane Beamer would likely be eager to jump to the other side of the Red River and coach the Longhorns. The Michigan job is going to be available in the not too distant future. If it's not at the end of 2020, I don't know what the Wolverines are waiting on. Jim Harbaugh's days there are numbered. There are going to be some pretty prestigious openings across college football, and so what I don't want to see is Shane Beamer take this South Carolina job spur of the moment.
Yeah, but you also
I would
have
like
to
to see him
remember-
explore his options.
Yeah, but you also have to remember that he's probably been waiting his entire life for a head coaching job like this to open up. And of course, the first one that he sees is going to take. It's not easy to get a head coach job at a Power 5 college football team, despite one in the SEC. So if he has the opportunity, he'll definitely jump on that.
Now, I wouldn't say it's prestigious, but you know where he would make a great fit at?
She's going to say Auburn.
Auburn.
Of
There it is.
course, of course.
Okay, staying in the Big 12, two coaches that are widely expected to be on the hot seat, one of them very squarely on the hot seat as of right now.
Yeah.
Tom Herman at Texas, Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State. Do either of them or both of them get fired at season's end? Caroline?
Okay, so I'm going to call it like it is, as bad as we want to talk about either one of those teams. But Oklahoma State is in a good position. And for the first time, they are a decent team that I think were contenders in the Big 12. And they love him in Stillwater. I don't think he goes anywhere anytime soon. But now let's look at Tom Herman. That guy has got to go, and I think they finally figured that out in Austin. Everyone has had a bad year, but let's go back to the TCU game for Texas. One of the worst teams in the Big 12 are the Horned Frogs, and they led Texas the entire game. That should have never happened. Then Texas causes a turnover in the third quarter. Things start looking up for them, but they don't produce anything out of it, and they don't produce for the rest of the game. Texas is able, you mentioned this earlier, to recruit. They have a top 10 recruiting class every year. Name someone out of those recruiting classes that's really made a big impact in the Big 12, in a draft, in the NFL.
Future #1 pick Sam Ellinger, right?
But that's what I'm saying. He has Sam Ellinger, and he does nothing with the weapons around him as far as play calling goes. I don't think there's any more excuses you can give Tom Herman. I don't know what the deal is with the higher-ups at Texas, but it's time for him to go because Texas is not a bad program. Someone good like Shane Beamer could very easily come into that position, and they could be an elite team again.
Well, Shane Beamer's going to go to South Carolina, predicting that.
Right.
But good word you used to describe Tom Herman, because I agree with you. Absolutely inexcusable. He's had inexcusable losses. It's his fourth year at Texas. He's had no Big 12 title and no college football playoff. It's the second longest conference championship drought with Tom Herman. You talked about the weapons. He has all the weapons. We just don't see those players advancing at all. And hey, Tom Herman, it's no longer an experiment. Under you, Texas will never be relevant, and I stand by that. Your decision-making is so rough. Your play calling, very questionable, and we saw that against that Iowa State game. You're inconsistent, and the ball security just isn't there. We see those fumbles and those turnovers, and it's just not happening here for Tom Herman. Mike Gundy on the other side, he's been there for a lot of years. He's been there for a long time. Oklahoma State, doesn't like a lot of change, so I think Gundy's definitely going to stay, but Tom Herman is out.
And Texas is a football school. I don't think Oklahoma State is trying to convince themselves or anyone else that football is the reason people go to school there.
I don't know what the rationale up in Stillwater is. All I know is Mike Gundy's got that job as long as he wants it. That man is not going anywhere. Yeah. And his contract structure is such that if Oklahoma State were ever to move on from him, they would owe him a lot of money on the way out the door.
He's got them.
The situation with Tom Herman at Texas is interesting to me, and here's why. Chris Del Conte, the Texas AD, has been very vocally in support of Tom Herman, a guy that's only gone 30-18 in nearly 4 full seasons at Texas. And as you mentioned, no Big 12 championship, only 1 conference championship game appearance. They lost, of course, in that rematch to Oklahoma in 2018. And there have been plenty of disappointing losses along the way, including 2 to Maryland, 3 to TCU. It just doesn't add up, and there are very few coaches, I would argue no coach across the country, doing less with more than Tom Herman because of how well he's recruited.
Exactly.
Texas recruits so well every year, and it simply does not translate on the football field. You can only chalk that up to poor leadership and poor coaching. And look, Texas has deep pockets in that athletic department. If they wanted to go buy Tom Herman out, it would not be a problem. So Del Conte's support for Herman is a little mind-boggling to me because I don't think the decision is going to be all on him, right? If the big donors down in Austin came to Del Conte and said, we want him out, here's a bunch of money, go cut him a check, he would have no choice. Here's the other interesting factor here. Urban Meyer appears very interested in that Texas job, and there are reports out there that he's putting together a potential staff to take the Texas job. Look, Urban Meyer's in the catbird seat there. If Urban Meyer called Chris Del Conte and said, hey, I want the Texas job, Chris Del Conte is hanging up with Urban Meyer, dialing up Tom Herman, and firing him right there on the spot.
What? I think there's also a connection there, too. I think Del Conte and Herman have a bond that they've had for a couple of years now. But it's also, at some point, you have to recognize that it's the coaching. It's not the players.
Exactly.
You have everything you need. Produce some wins. Like, I'm sick of seeing them lose. As much as I hate Texas, like, I feel bad for the guy. Like, he has nothing going for him right now.
That is why I feel so bad for Sam Ellinger, because he is an efficient quarterback and no one is doing anything to help him. That's why I'm saying put him in the NFL and he's going to produce. But also, Urban Meyer, what is up with that guy? Can he just not stay away?
He doesn't like to stay in one place.
No.
Yeah, that man, I don't think anybody is going to take him seriously if he should retire a 3rd time.
I know.
The amount of pump fakes that he's thrown at all of us.
Is he just trying to get into like every conference and make a name for himself, or what's the deal?
Yeah, trying
there?
to get in like the world record book or something for most conferences coach.
All right, well, there's plenty more to come here on Game Day U when we see you again. Final words, call-outs, and score predictions for Oklahoma's tilt tonight against Baylor.
Welcome back to Game Day U. The college football season is winding down and we're beginning to talk playoff scenarios. But in the high school football world, it's championship weekend. We're getting late into the playoffs all across the state with 2 big-time state championship matchups today. At 1 o'clock, Edmond Santa Fe will face off with Jenks in a bit of a David versus Goliath game for the 6A1 state title. The Wolves are searching for their first ever state championship, while Jenks will look to win its 17th gold ball. And in the primetime 7 o'clock slot, Choctaw will square off with the Bixby Spartans. In 5A, we now know the state championship will either go to Bishop McGuinness or Carl Albert. And last night, Wagner stomped Cushing 40-14, and just down Highway 9, Clinton punched their ticket to the state final with a 10-7 win over Blanchard. The 5A and 4A state championship games will be played next Saturday, with all games being played at Wantland Stadium on the campus of UCO. Now, one of the most integral parts of the game never seems to get much love on TV, but this week we're going to shed some light on them. Yes, I'm talking about the O-line. Jesse, which school's offensive line is the best in the country this year?
This year, I think it is the A&M's O-line, the Maroon Goons. That is their nickname the coaches have for them. They have only allowed 3 sacks this entire year. A&M has gone 6-1, only losing to the #1 Alabama. Their sophomore running back Isaiah Spiller has an average of 6 yards per carry with 784 rushing yards and 6 rushing touchdowns. This offense is quick, sharp, and they are amazing at finding and creating holes in other teams' defenses like South Carolina, who they crushed 48-3. That was an incredible game. They got touchdown after touchdown. Look here, they are just always finding those ways and just having easy walk-in touchdowns. And honestly, their O-line has been doing so impressive, and that's why I think that they are one of the best in the country this year.
Well, you look to the south, I'm going to look to the north. The best offensive line in college football resides in Buffalo, New York. Here's why. Jarrett Patterson, you talked about him earlier. He had a monster game last week. The week before that, he had 301 yards and 4 touchdowns. Those stat lines don't happen by accident. This line has been paving the way for him all year. Him and the other Bulls running backs have been stopped at or before the line of scrimmage on just 8.5% of carries this season. That's the lowest percentage in college football. In pass protection, they have kept the pocket clean. You said Texas A&M allowed 3 sacks so far? Try 0. That's right. The quarterback at Buffalo has not been sacked once this season. He has been pressured just twice.
I thought Jarrett Patterson was amazing, but it turns out their whole offensive is amazing. What about you, Ashley?
Well, you guys took it north and south. I'm taking it west with BYU. BYU is ranked number 8, and a huge reason is because of their offensive line. Their offensive line gives their rushers room to get down the field, make those touchdowns, and score those big plays. And they give their Zach Wilson plenty of time to scan the field and make his throws. They protect their quarterback, and that is one of the reasons this BYU team is so great this year. It's an like you said, it's an underrated area of the football team, the offensive line sometimes, but they are so crucial in getting those scoring plays in and protecting the quarterback. So that's my pick for our best offensive line.
No, I agree with you. Like I said earlier, BYU, they've had a great season. And like Zach Wilson, he's been doing amazing with the help of the offensive line. Just phenomenal performance, phenomenal.
All I'm going to say, 0 sacks.
All right. Okay, well now we're going to take it to the defensive side. We talk all the time about quarterbacks and running backs as star players that week in and week out help lead their team to wins. But let's take it to the other side of the ball. Which defensive player has solidified themselves as the best this year? Jesse?
So there's a lot to look at when you're thinking about a defensive player. There's a lot of different criteria, but I'm going to go with Michigan State's junior quarterback, Shakur Brown. He has had 5 interceptions this season, and he's tied for the most in college football this season. And 2 of those interceptions were this past weekend against Northwestern, along with 2 total tackles. He is able to get the ball, and he just makes a run for it. He is fast, he is quick, and he is always alert. His interceptions contributed to Northwestern's defeat and dropped them down 8 spots to number 16, crushing Northwestern's hope for any playoffs. And for a defensive player to have that power in one game, incredible, incredible.
You know, when I think best defensive player, though, I'm thinking of a guy who can do it all. And for me, that is Tulsa's Zaven Collins, linebacker superstar. In 6 games, he has 49 tackles, 10.5 tackles for a loss. That includes 4 sacks. He has 4 interceptions, which is insane for a linebacker. He's forced 2 fumbles, and he's caused 1 safety. There are so many different ways this guy can hurt you, whether he's back in coverage or applying pressure up front. Let's look at some film here on this next play. Watch him up top. He sees the quarterback getting ready to run. He has his eyes on him the whole way. He gets off his block, runs down, and smacks the ball out of his hands. This play here, he reads the quarterback's eyes the whole way again, drops back into coverage, picks it off, and takes it back for 6. This guy can get it done no matter where you put him on the field. He is a fantastic player, best defensive player in college football this year.
No, that is really impressive because, like, Shakur, he's got a lot of interceptions, but it's a different thing to take an interception and turn into a pick 6. That is really impressive. I did not know that.
And you didn't even see the 96-yard game-winning pick 6 in overtime against Tulane that he had.
Dang. What about you, Ashley?
All right, well, I'm going to take it to the defensive back position. And while linemen are super crucial, we don't think about defensive backs as much, but my best defensive player is Patrick Surtain II from Alabama, and he is a very crucial part of this Alabama defense. He is 6'2", so he's really tall for a corner, which means that it's easier for him to cover a lot of those taller receivers that are out there on the field, and a lot of defensive backs aren't that tall. So he has 27 tackles on the season, and he had 42 last year. So I think that it's an underlooked position, but he's definitely one of the best defensive players in college football, and Alabama always has great players. So I'm going with him for my best pick.
I mean, I don't know. You know, both of y'all had defensive backs who are great in their positions. But when you look at a player as a whole player, Zaven Collins is effective, whether he's back in coverage or you can send him up front to apply pressure. He is the most dynamic defensive player in college football, and that, to me, is what makes him the best.
Well, I mean, that's what I said. There's a lot of different criteria. I mean, so much makes up the aspect of a defensive player.
Right.
And there's a lot of different scenarios and things you need to look at. And I think Shakur Brown, 2 interceptions in one game, really impressive. But I mean, I've been seeing a lot of interceptions this year, honestly. That's just me. But I don't know, just the way he turned the game around, just crushing Northwestern, destroying their hopes. I mean, that is a power player right there.
All right, well, when Gameday U returns, we'll send it to the remote team for callouts, final words, and score predictions.
Winding down to the finish line here on Gameday U, Parker Thune, Shannon Earhart, Caroline Grace here with you. Final predictions coming up for Oklahoma versus Baylor tonight, 7 p.m. right there at Owen Field. First things first, Shannon, Caroline, let's go back to the Baylor Bears. What do you expect that they're going to bring to the table tonight with Dave Aranda at the helm? What can they possibly throw at Oklahoma to disrupt their plans?
Not much.
Well, on one side, I want to go with there's going to be no run game. But with that, I want to say it's going to be a lot of air raid, which is something that needs to be done if you're going to play this Oklahoma defense. Ronnie Perkins going to put a lot of pressure on that offensive front, including Charlie Brewer and all the running backs around him. So I think they're really going to utilize getting those flares out wide, trying to go long. And so it's not necessarily what I think they're going to bring, but they're definitely not going to be able to stay in the pocket, do run games, anything of that matter, because our defensive front's going to be able to stop their offensive front. It's going to be about getting that ball downfield as quickly as possible. I think if we can startle up that secondary, I don't even know why I said that, but if Baylor can startle up that OU secondary, that's going to make all the difference in their success, not a beatdown, in Gaylord, Oklahoma Memorial Stadium.
Startle them up, y'all.
I agree with you here. I agree with you here that the defense is going to be huge for OU. They're really going to come out hot. And because they're going to come out so hot, Charlie Brewer is going to choke. There's going to be a lack of production from him because of the high pressure that the defense is going to bring. He's just going to be shut down and be unable to stay on his feet. I think the Sooners D will really test his pass protection. And we saw last week that OU's D really shut down both Sanders and Illingworth. And they're both better than Charlie Brewer, in my opinion. So I think Brewer definitely will get worn down and just make poor decisions because he's frazzled out of the pocket and won't be able to get the ball downfield, as you were saying. I think David Agwebu is going to be great, too, alongside Ronnie Perkins for that Sooner defense. So excited to see what happens, but Charlie Brewer collapses.
One thing to keep in mind, Dave Aranda is very, very familiar with Oklahoma's offensive scheme because last year, as LSU defensive coordinator, he had 3 weeks to game plan for it, leading into the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, which, as we'll recall, did not go so hot for Oklahoma on the offensive side. 63-28, LSU prevailed in that contest and an overwhelming performance on both sides of the football. But Aranda maybe knows Riley's offensive scheme better than any other defensive coordinator in the, or I said defensive coordinator, better than any head coach in the Big 12, simply because when you have that much time to lock into one coach's game plan, you're prepared for anything that he could throw your way. And we saw that last year in the Peach Bowl when Dave Aranda was ready for whatever Lincoln Riley threw at him, whether that was trick plays, whether that was misdirection. LSU shut it all down and shut it down emphatically. So if Baylor can bring that same creativity on defense and be prepared for Oklahoma to pull out the bag of tricks and have some tricks of their own to counter it, then Baylor has a chance.
What type of tricks are you talking about? Some reverses?
It very well could be. Actually, the very same pass play that Spencer Rattler threw the touchdown pass on to Jeremiah Hall against Oklahoma State, they ran that against LSU in the Peach Bowl and didn't get anything out of it.
Well, I don't think they'll throw that again then. Sorry, I don't think they'll throw that again then if they didn't work the first time and now that Aranda has a whole new team. Also, we're saying that, yes, he did great in that LSU, OSU, or OU game, but now that he has a whole new team and different guys to work with, especially for both sides of the ball, not sure if he's really going to be able to predict Oklahoma's offense.
All right, time for call-outs. Who are you zoning in on for the Sooners, Caroline? Who's going to be the impact performer tonight?
First of all, Parker, do not call me out for my country accent when you know I've been at home for like the past week and a half.
That's exactly why I'm calling it out.
Fair.
It's rude.
I'm just trying to get, everything running again smoothly. As you can see, it's a process.
You sound great.
But my call out is going to be Ronnie Perkins. Now, normally I take this in a negative way because I'm calling someone out because they either haven't performed, underperformed, they're not doing their job, or they're just flat out terrible. But in this case, Ronnie Perkins has been the game changer. That's the only hope I have in putting Oklahoma into that possible playoff we've talked about if so many things fall apart in the rest of the college football world. But Ronnie Perkins needs to keep doing what he's doing. It's as simple as that. Keep on keeping on. That's what Ronnie Perkins needs to do.
Keep on keeping on.
For the rest of the season. I think he's a dynamic player.
Yeah, he needs to keep the momentum going, that explosiveness. His leadership, I think, really helps as well. But TJ Pledger, we talked about him earlier. He's been a bit quiet. He's had nothing but compliments this year, and now that Stevenson is back that we talked about earlier, Pledger hasn't had a lot of that time since now Stevenson is that key guy. But Pledger, you were averaging 100 yards per game, and at Bedlam you only had 18. Show me the Texas Pledger. I want to see it. Your run game needs to be more explosive, and you need to be more on your toes. We know that you can do it. Like, all we need to see is you just put it into action, put it forth, get the wheels turning.
Now, I made this call out before we knew that there was the potential for Bob Stoops to be on the sidelines on Saturday. I'm calling out Bob's kid, Drake Stoops, because I think there's a potential for him to have a really big game tonight. Because when I look at this Baylor defense, they have maybe the best nickel back in the Big 12 in Jalen Petrie. Oklahoma's got plenty of playmakers in the receiving game. You look at Marvin Mims, Theo Weiss, Austin Stogner, Jeremiah Hall, what have you. Jaden Hazelwood could be back. So there's a variety of guys that they can look to. But I think Petrie is going to draw the assignment on Marvin Mims just based on how big of an impact Mims has had in the downfield passing game. That could open up a lot of opportunities for Drake Stoops underneath. So this is a game where I think Drake Stoops could log a career high in catches and maybe cross the 100-yard barrier just because of the opportunities that are going to be available to him in the underneath passing game.
Let me ask you this. Do you think Drake Stoops is going to feel more or less comfortable now that his dad is going to be there right with him?
I mean, it's an incentive.
What's your take
how
there?
nostalgic. What a nostalgic moment for that kid. I mean, you grew up with your dad as a coach. You're getting to have one game where your dad is out there calling plays. I know he doesn't like to make it about Bob Stoops, but how can you not?
I think I'd be so nervous. I'd be like, oh my gosh, my dad's on the sideline. It's like Pee-wee football again.
That's true. That's true.
All right, final words. What do you got, Caroline?
I'm going with big because
Wow. Deep,
all right.
Deep stuff here.
All right, big word, right? No. Here's the reason. Don't laugh, because it's actually a good reason. Teams in the Big 12 have got to start making secure wins. It can't be 23-26, 2017, 10-7 anymore. You have got to make a statement. You've got to prove to the nation that you are the better football team. Oklahoma goes out there and beats Baylor by 20. There's no question they're one of the top contenders for the playoff anymore. So they've got to make big plays. They've got to make a big statement. And overall, they just have to play big.
My word, pulverize. OU needs to come out with clubs swinging it and just absolutely run the table. If they do that, they're really going to prove their spot and be able to win out. But what they need to do for these last 2 games is really just start out strong and pulverize the other team. Baylor's not a good team. They've got some hurt guys. Also, so does OU. They got some COVID. So we really need to see OU come and show out and just give it all that they got for these last 2 games.
My final word is denouement, because as I look at the narrative arc of the Oklahoma Sooners season, you had the early conflict, right? 2 losses in the Sooners' first 3 games. Then you had the slow build to the climax, a 5-game winning streak for Oklahoma that they carry into this contest against Baylor. Now with just 2 games remaining in the regular season, coming off an open date on that Thanksgiving weekend cancellation when they were supposed to go up to Morgantown and play West Virginia, it's time for the Sooners to finish strong with the denouement of the Big 12 slate.
Viewers, you're welcome. I Googled this word because he tends to pick words that not a lot of people know. Could have made my own personal dictionary by this point. But the meaning, it's a noun. It's the final part of a play, movie, or narrative in which the strands of the plot are drawn together and matters are explained or resolved, or the climax of a chain of events, usually when something is decided or made clear. In other words, finale.
That's what I was going to say. In other words, finale. I learn something new each week, but could have really made it simple for everybody else.
Parker's just not a simple guy.
It's not the finale,
He's not a simple
though.
guy.
What we appreciate about
is
Parker.
broader than
Oh,
the
yeah, I
finale.
really appreciate learning something, so.
Yeah.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Good word.
All right, final score predictions.
Okay, I'm going to go with 42-17 Oklahoma. Usually I'm kind of on the upset side. I don't think that Baylor has what it takes to be that fourth quarter team in Oklahoma. I know that they could possibly, just with all of the things that are going on inside the Oklahoma's program, could come in and give them a run for their money, but they're not going to close in on it. And I think by mid-third quarter, fourth quarter, we're still going to have Spencer Rattler in, and he's going to be able to take off and really capitalize and win big.
All right, I'm going to raise you 10, 52-17. OU absolutely dominates this game, comes out hot, and doesn't even give Baylor a chance to really respond. I think they stun them right away. Rattler throws a bunch of good plays. Ronnie Perkins decks a couple of people, and OU takes the win, 52-17.
I've got the Sooners as well. I think this will be a very fast game. I think Oklahoma's going to want to keep the clock running, especially playing shorthanded, and with their clear advantage in the trenches over Baylor. I think we see a lot of the run game from Oklahoma tonight. 38-10 is my final score. I believe Ramondre Stevenson carries the ball 30 times. I think that's how run-heavy Oklahoma's offense tonight is going to be. So I would anticipate that Oklahoma just tries to get in, get out, win the battle up front, have a strong defensive performance, whether that's with Alex Grinch or Bob Stoops calling the shots,
Glad
and
we're all on
send
the
the
same
Baylor
page here.
Bears right on back to Waco with their 6th defeat of the season.
Where they belong.
Any closing thoughts with regard to this game on Senior Day? Any observations, reminiscences?
Parker, I'm going to miss you.
I guess it's
maybe
my
on
Senior Day
Friday.
too,
It's
isn't
your
it?
senior day as well. We didn't mention that. It's great having you on the show.
It's sad that it's all come to an end. It feels wrong.
It's all right. You got grad school. You'll be around. We'll see you.
I guess so. Yeah, you're not getting rid of me.
And Kurt, although Kurt will be with us next semester, but Game Day U's definitely been worthwhile. We've made the most of it, being stuck in Norman all season.
Kurt, of course, is our fantastic field producer, Kurt Watson. For all of our crew, Sports Director Barry Orr, Crew Chief Ken Fisher, Field Engineer Jared Thomas, our tremendous photographer, Cindy Jordan, and everybody that contributes to this show on a weekly basis. Thank you so much. And we'll hopefully see you again. We're not ruling out the possibility of a Big 12 championship program here on Game Day U or a bowl game show. Now, we will not have programming for you next week with the West Virginia game as we run up against finals season, Shannon and Caroline.
Yes.
But we
Finals
will hope
Who are we calling out for that one? What's
Myself.
your score prediction?
we will hope to see you again, but we will see what the future holds. For now, that's going to do it for us here on Game Day U. Coming up next, Ashley Vandevelde and the studio team take you the rest of the way. Thanks for watching.
Welcome back to Game Day U. It's our last segment of the show, and that means it's time for Pick'em. But first, Jesse, which matchup is your game to watch?
As I said earlier, BYU versus Coastal Carolina is the game to watch today. They're both undefeated, and it's a big game for BYU, so I think it's going to make for a great game.
I've got Tulsa at Navy. Golden Hurricane looking to clinch a spot in the AAC title game for the first time ever.
I have Ohio State versus Michigan State. This is a decent Michigan State team. It's a necessary win for Ohio State to get into that championship in the playoff, so we'll see how that one goes. All right, up first, we take it to the SEC, a top 25 matchup between Auburn and Texas A&M. Jesse, who comes out on top?
I think it's going to be Auburn.
A&M.
I have A&M too. Auburn's offense is a little basic for me, and I don't think Bo Nix always makes the best decisions on the field, so I think
the Aggies' defense has allowed just 10 points in their last two
There you
games.
go.
I fully expect them to eat Bo Nix's lunch.
But Auburn can win as long as they focus on adjusting their defense if Bo Nix plays well.
if he plays well. Now we've seen Wisconsin get toppled by the Northwestern Wildcats, and Indiana is now without starting QB Michael Penix Jr. So this game maybe gets a bit more interesting with those two developments. Jesse, who you got?
I'm rooting for Indiana.
Nope, Wisconsin.
I have Wisconsin too. It's a home game for Wisconsin. I think they always play different at Camp Randall. I think it's a huge detriment that Indiana's QB is missing, but I'm excited to see what Jack Tuttle will do. He was a highly touted recruit, but he transferred to Indiana from Utah. So I think Wisconsin's going to win this one with their defense. So.
But Indiana only lost to Ohio State last week by a touchdown. So if they fix their defensive mistakes, they'll easily win against Washington.
I think without their QB, it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, Jack Tuttle is very good, but that Wisconsin defense is going to put a lot of pressure on him. I don't think that's an ideal situation for a quarterback making his first career start.
Yep. Every year, this matchup is one of the most talked about games that we see, Alabama and LSU. This year, Alabama is the heavy favorites, but can LSU pull off the upset?
I think LSU is going to upset just due to deep-rooted motivation.
Jesse, I hate to break it to you, but Joe Burrow and Clyde Edwards-Helaire aren't walking through that door. Give me the Tide.
Yeah, Alabama is such a force, offense, defense. I think they might even win it all this year, so I got Alabama. Last year, OU beat Baylor in thrilling fashion, a comeback for the ages. This year, both teams look a bit different. Jesse, what do you expect from the OU Baylor game tonight?
I think OU is going to win almost easily. Our defense is great, and we have a great opportunity at crushing them.
Look at that. We finally agree. OU is going to roll tonight. They are clearly superior offensively. Baylor just can't keep up.
Boomer Sooner. I got OU. I think this is Dave Aranda's first year. I'm excited to see what he's going to do in coming years. You know, he's got to get his guys in there, get his team, his game plan. But this year, I got OU. But we got to keep that momentum going if we want to continue into the offseason and what that holds for us. Last but not least, let's talk upsets. Which favorite will be on the wrong side of the scoreboard this weekend?
My upset is Illinois over Iowa. They are on a 2-game winning streak, and last week they crushed Nebraska 41-23, whereas Iowa barely beat Nebraska 26-20. So it's not impossible and will make for a great game.
I've got Kansas State over Texas. Mentally, I don't think the Longhorns are in a good spot right now. They couldn't close it out against Iowa State last week, and they've now had 2 team captains, Caden Stearns and Samuel Cosme, opt out. That's not good for morale.
I have TCU over number 19, Oklahoma State. It's at TCU. TCU has a stride. They've won 3 of their last 4, and I like TCU's offense over Oklahoma State's defense. I think they're going to have trouble stopping them. But thank you for watching Game Day U here in Gaylord Hall at the University of Oklahoma. This is our final full show of the semester, but be sure to watch Game Day U Hoops on Thursday nights starting in January of 2021. A special shout out to all of our crew for showing up early every Saturday morning. To Dean Ed Kelly, Barry Orr, Ken Fisher, Lynn Franklin, and of course our engineer David Candy. Thank you for all of your help this season. For Jesse Cleaner and Matt Bowling, I'm Ashley Vandevelde. Be sure to keep up with Game Day U on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Have a fun and safe game day, and maybe, just maybe, we'll see you for the Big 12 Championship.
Take 1, marker.